A century later, a little-known mass hanging of black soldiers still haunts us. 100 years after one of the least known and saddest chapters in American history, families of executed black soldiers have petitioned Trump for justice. After Hurricane Harvey devastated Houston in September, recovery and cleanup workers discovered that vandals had smeared red paint over a historical marker at the one-time location of Camp Logan, recently rededicated to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Houston riot of 1917. The paint covered the segment of the inscription that explained the history of the 3rd Battalion of the 24th United States Infantry, a predominantly black unit assigned to guard the camp during its construction shortly after the United States entered World War I. Beneath the paint, the words read, "The Black Soldiers, August 23, 1917, armed revolt in response to Houston's Jim Crow laws and police harassment resulted in the camp's most publicized incident, the Houston Mutiny and Riot of 1917. The Houston riot grew out of a confrontation between the soldiers and Houston City Police, at the end of which 16 white people were dead, including 5 policemen, with 4 soldiers also killed. It was one of the only riots in U.S. history in which more white people died than black people. At the resulting 3 court-martials, the first of which was the largest one in military history, a total of 118 enlisted black soldiers were indicted, with 110 found guilty. 19 black men were executed by hanging and 53 received life sentences. For a century, families of the executed soldiers have lived with the memories and loss. Relatives alive today grew up hearing their families talk about the soldiers' fates, which served as a catalyst to learn more and to work for justice to make amends. My family was upset when I started looking into it, admits Jason Holt, a relative of Private Hawkins, one of the soldiers hanged. Holt has a 100-year-old letter written by Private Hawkins to his mother the night before his execution, telling her not to be upset about him taking his seat in heaven and of his innocence. They sent those soldiers into the most hostile environment imaginable, Charles Anderson, a relative of Sergeant William Nesbitt, one of the hanged soldiers, told me over the phone. There was Jim Crow law, racist cops, racist civilians laws against them being treated fairly in the streetcars, while the workers building Logan Camp hated the soldiers' presence. The riot was a problem created by community policing in a hostile environment, agrees Paul Matthews, founder of the Houston Buffalo Soldiers National Museum, which examines the role of American soldiers during U.S. military history. It's up to people now to decide whether there are lessons relevant to the present. The majority of the soldiers posted at Camp Logan were raised in the South and familiar with segregation and Jim Crow laws, but as Army servicemen, they expected fair treatment during their service in Houston. The police and public officials in that city viewed the presence of black soldiers as a threat. Many Houstonians were concerned that if the black soldiers were shown the same respect as white soldiers, black residents might come to expect similar treatment. Tensions grew between the troops guarding Camp Logan and the Houston police locals. The sight of black men wearing uniforms and carrying guns incensed white residents. There we go with black men carrying guns. The soldiers themselves were angered by the whites-only signs being called the N-word by white Houstonians, and the streetcar conductors demanded they sit in the rear. Then, in August, the police arrested a black soldier for interfering with the arrest of a black woman. When one of the battalion's military police went to inquire about the arrested soldier, an argument ensued, resulting in the military policeman fleeing the police station amid shots before being arrested himself. Rumors, which turned out to be false, reached Camp Logan that the military man had been killed and that a white mob was approaching the camp. There was no mob, but the black soldiers had good reason to be fearful. The country was rife with racial tensions. Just 2 years later, cities would erupt in unrest during the Red Summer, and in 1921 a white mob in Tulsa, Oklahoma murdered hundreds of innocent black people. More than 100 soldiers grabbed rifles and headed into downtown Houston. During a 2-hour rampage, the soldiers killed 16 white residents, including 5 policemen. The next day, martial law was declared in Houston, and the following day, the unit was dispatched back to its base in New Mexico. The court-martial soon followed. It was a dark, rainy night during the riot, Anderson says. At the trial, the civilian witnesses couldn't identify one soldier firing the shots that killed people. 7 mutineers agreed to testify against the others in exchange for clemency. Only one lawyer represented the 63 soldiers during the first court-martial. The 13 sentenced to death on November 28th were not given the right to appeal. On December 11th, they were taken by truck to the scaffold where 13 ropes dangled from a crossbeam. The men did not have a fair trial, says Sandra Heitman, the great-granddaughter of one of the policemen killed. I have no doubt that the likelihood the men executed had nothing to do with the deaths. Only 2 white officers faced court-martials, and they were released. Not a single white civilian was brought to trial. In Houston, a rapidly growing city, knowledge of the event is mixed. Most newcomers knew nothing about it, but that is changing. There was no public acknowledgement for a long time. Lila Rakotsi, program coordinator of military sites and oral history programs at the Texas Historical Commission, said in a phone interview, the centennial of the American entry into the World War I was probably helped heighten awareness and encourage people to talk about it. Earlier this year, Angela Holder, a professor at Houston Community College and the great niece of Corporal Jesse Moore, one of the soldiers hanged, helped lobby for gravestones from the Veterans Administration for unmarked graves in a Houston cemetery. Of 2 soldiers killed during the riot, but still more remains to be done for the soldiers, the relatives say. We tried during the Obama presidency for a posthumous pardon and were on the list but missed out, says Holder. Perhaps we can approach a Texas politician or a national association for the advancement of colored people to help. Earlier this year, petitions for the pardons were sent to the Trump White House. The relatives are still waiting a response as the 100th anniversary of the day of execution approaches. According to a written account by one of the soldiers overseeing the execution, the 13 men executed on December 11, 1917, showed great bravery that moved all those watching. None made any attempt to resist or speak as they were taken from the trucks to the scaffold. Not a word out of any of you men now, Sergeant William Nesbitt proclaimed to his men in his final living moment. And this is from, I'll leave it in the description. This is fascinating during Black History Month, but it's also fascinating with the uprising of ADOS. This highlights the history of what Black people had to go through, Black soldiers especially, and how dense and how thick the racism was, and in some parts still is. Black people have always struggled. It's not something that had happened during the 60s. It's been a continuous struggle since we've been here. This is why Claude Anderson calls us an exceptional people. We have an exceptional history. We have an exceptional struggle, especially in a land that claims to be the home of the free and the brave, where every man is created equal in the eyes of God. And for America to live to its claim, to its credence, to give the Negro the same opportunity that is given all its immigrants that have landed on its shores. I guess since we were not immigrants, us and the Native Americans, we're not included in that promise. Even though again and again, America has used us as a stepping stone to advance itself. The immigrants have used us as a stepping stone to advance themselves. At what point can the stepping stone get off its knees and to its feet to take its place alongside everybody else? Civil rights are for blacks. Civil rights are for the Negro. Civil rights are for ADOS, American descendants of slaves. Civil rights are for the slave class that was created by the United States and still perpetuates that class till this day. Or you got to look at the prisoner rolls, the poverty rolls, the unemployment rolls, the homeless. We're well overrepresented in all those negative categories. And all we're asking is that we be allowed to get to our feet and get a hand up just like every other person, every other group that has ever landed on this shore. With that, I'm going to jump off of here. This is BGS out, and I will see you guys on the next one. Peace.